coffee cup was wrong. That was the detail. Not the meeting, not the building, not the woman herself, who was, by every measure available to a person walking into a conference room for a job interview, exactly what the internet said she was. Composed, precise, formidable, the kind of woman who had built a $8 billion company from a single algorithm she'd written at 22, and who wore that history the way certain people wore authority, naturally, without effort, like a coat they'd put on so long ago they'd forgotten it was a coat. The coffee cup was wrong. She held it with her right hand, always her right, as he would come to notice over the following days, cradled against her palm rather than gripped by the handle. The handle faced away from her. No one holds a cup that way unless they've decided at some point not to. Owen Marsh sat across the table from Claire Ashworth and noticed the cup and said nothing. He had been a structural engineer for 9 years. His entire professional life had been built around the principle that the detail that did not fit was the detail that mattered. A load path that did not resolve. A weld that was too clean. A reading technically within tolerance, but wrong for the context. The cup was wrong for the context. He filed it without drawing a conclusion. The interview lasted 40 minutes. Claire asked 6 questions, each the kind that could distinguish between a false answer and a true one. He gave her the true answers because the true answers were shorter, and because he was constitutionally unsuited to the kind of professional self-presentation that required performing a better version of himself. She would see through it. She looked at things until she understood them. He told her about leaving structural engineering because the work stopped feeling proportional to what he could offer it. He had never said it that directly to anyone before. To previous interviewers he had said, "I decided to transition into facilities management to leverage my engineering background in a different operational context," which was also true, technically, and which passed through professional conversations without leaving a mark. He said the true version to Claire Ashworth and watched her register it the way she registered things, briefly, completely, without the performance of sympathy. Not pity. Recognition. The brief expression of someone who understood the calculation behind a decision like that. Because she had made that kind of calculation herself. He did not know yet what her calculation had been. He would understand it fully in 3 weeks. But in the interview room he understood, this was a person who had organized her life around a decision about what was sustainable and was not interested in the kind of professional relationship that required pretending things were other than they were. He drove home with the job. He made Nora dinner. He helped with the reading worksheet. He looked up early onset Parkinson's adaptive management on the internet. He closed the laptop and made a rule and went to bed. He had been a structural engineer for 9 years. His entire professional life had been built around the principle that the detail that didn't fit was the detail that mattered. A load path that didn't resolve. A weld that was too clean. A reading that was technically within tolerance but wrong for the context. One impossible detail. He took the job. He had no idea, sitting in that conference room, what he had just walked into. If you've ever hidden something true about yourself to protect what you built, drop a heart and tell me what city your watchy Owen Marsh had not planned to become a facilities manager. For 9 years he had been a structural engineer. Good at it. Genuinely good at it. The kind of engineer who understood that a building was not an object but a system of forces in equilibrium, and who found in that understanding a specific satisfaction that most people found in other things. He had designed bridge retrofits and hospital expansion joints and a pedestrian overpass in southeast Portland that had won a regional engineering award and that he still drove past occasionally, noting with quiet approval that it continued to hold. Ruth had always said he was the only person she knew who looked at buildings the way other people looked at art. Not admiringly, but analytically. The way you looked at something when you were trying to understand how it worked. She had died 22 months ago in a crosswalk on Burnside on a Tuesday afternoon in March when Nora was at school and Owen was in a meeting reviewing load calculations for a commercial development in the Pearl District. The driver was 23 and had a blood alcohol level of 0, 17 and was looking at his phone. Ruth died at the scene. Owen learned about it from a police officer who appeared in the lobby of his firm at 4:15 and whose face, in the moment before he spoke, told Owen everything he needed to know before the words arrived. He had taken 6 months of leave and come back to find that the engineering work felt different. Not bad, not impossible. Just different. The way a room feels different when something important has been removed from it and you keep expecting it to be there. He had stayed another 8 months, finishing what he'd started. And then he had left with the professional courtesy of a man who understood that his heart was not in the right place for structural loads anymore, and that structural loads deserved a heart that was in the right place. He had moved into facilities management because it used the same vocabulary: building systems, load management, preventive maintenance, the relationship between a structure and the people who occupied it, but at a scale that felt proportional to what his attention could hold. He had taken a position at a mid-sized commercial building in the Lloyd district and had done it well for 7 months, and had then seen the Ashworth Systems listing in his network, Director of Facilities and Campus Operations. Portland headquarters, company-owned campus of 4 buildings, competitive salary and benefits. The salary was higher than his engineering rate had been. He applied because of Nora, because the benefits were good and the campus was 20 minutes from her school, and because the facilities director role had the kind of defined scope that was friendly to a single-parent schedule, in a way that structural engineering, with its unpredictable site demands, was not. He did not apply because of Claire Ashworth, about whom he had, before the interview, a professional second-hand knowledge that she had founded the company at 22 with an algorithm for industrial process optimization that had turned out to be foundational enough to build an entire software category around, that she was known for a management style that was direct to the point of discomfort and demanding to the point of legend, that she had turned down 3 acquisition offers in 15 years, including one that would have made her personally wealthy beyond the already considerable wealth she had from the company's public offering, and that this was the word that appeared most frequently in the profiles and the board assessments and the employee reviews, all of which Owen had read carefully before the interview. Unknowable, not cold. Unknowable, there was a distinction. The profiles seemed to agree, though none of them could quite say what it was. He understood the distinction better after he met her. The conference room at Ashworth Systems was on the 4th floor of the main building, a converted warehouse space in the Central East Side that Claire had bought and renovated in the company's 4th year. And it had the quality of a room that had been designed by someone who thought carefully about what rooms were for. Good light from the east-facing windows, acoustic panels that were also aesthetically considered. A table that was the right size, not too large, not a display of corporate scale, just the right size for a working conversation between 2 or 3 people. Owen noticed all of this because he was a facilities professional, and noticing rooms was his job, and also because noticing rooms was who he was. Claire Ashworth arrived 2 minutes after he did. She was 44, with the contained energy of a person who moved through the world at a specific controlled pace that was not slowness, but precision. She was not tall. She was wearing a dark blazer over a gray shirt, no jewelry except small stud earrings, no watch. Her left hand, as she sat down across from him, came to rest on the table with the specific quality he would later identify as deliberate, fingers slightly curled, the weight of the hand resting on its outer edge, the whole posture suggesting repose, but not quite achieving it. And then she picked up the coffee cup and held it the way she held it, and Owen noticed. He said nothing. He had spent 9 years as a structural engineer, and he knew the difference between a detail that meant something and a detail whose meaning he didn't yet understand. And the right response to the second category was to observe and not conclude. She asked him questions in the direct way of someone who had been asking direct questions for long enough that they'd stopped worrying about whether the directness was comfortable. Why had he left structural engineering? What did he understand about facilities management that most engineers didn't? What was the hardest physical plant problem he had ever diagnosed, and how had he diagnosed it? He answered all of them accurately, including the part about why he'd left engineering, which he gave her in 1 sentence. His wife died, and the work stopped feeling proportional to what he could offer it. She looked at him for a moment after that, not with the sympathy that the sentence usually produced, the careful, practiced sympathy of professional people managing a personal disclosure in a business context, but with something that was more like recognition, brief, gone before he could examine it. The hardest diagnostic problem, she said, returning to the list. He told her about a building in the Lloyd district, where a recurring vac, pressure imbalance, had been misdiagnosed 3 times by 3 different contractors before he had identified it as a duct lining separation inside an inaccessible chase that was visible only through a specific sequence of pressure tests under specific load conditions. He had found it by trusting the pattern of the symptoms rather than the conclusions of the previous diagnosticians. She listened to this with the quality of attention she brought to everything. Full, steady, without the performance of engagement, just the actual thing. You trusted the pattern over the prior conclusions, she said. Yes, most people don't do that. Most people aren't wrong about the prior conclusions, he said. She looked at him for another of her looking moments. The HVAC contractor we used most recently has been our primary vendor for 4 years, she said. They've done good work on multiple projects. Their work on the other projects was probably good, Owen said. This problem wasn't in their domain. It was a control systems problem wearing a HVAC costume. They saw the costume. And you saw through it. I had different context. I came in without the previous diagnoses in my head. She considered this. You're arguing that prior knowledge can be a liability. I'm arguing that prior knowledge that's wrong in a consistent direction is a liability, he said. 3 contractors told you it was equipment failure. That consensus made it harder to look somewhere else. If I'd read their reports before I walked the building, I might have anchored to the same conclusion. She was quiet for a moment. Not the long pause of processing, the shorter one of someone filing something for later use. I'll keep that in mind, she said. The value of someone who hasn't read the previous reports. In specific circumstances, he said. Usually you want someone who has read the reports. Yes, she said. But not always. She stood. The meeting was over. She extended her right hand. He shook it. Monday, she said. I was just in a case where the prior conclusions were all wrong in the same direction. She looked at him for another moment. Then you'd start Monday? Yes, good, she stood, which meant the interview was over. She extended her right hand. He shook it. He drove home. He picked up Nora from Mrs. Huang's. He made dinner. He helped with the reading worksheet. He put Nora to bed. He sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and thought about the coffee cup. He had seen the posture before. Not in a CEO, not in an office, in a PT clinic in Northwest Portland where Ruth had done her post-ACL rehabilitation 3 years ago, and where Owen had waited in the reception area while she worked through the sessions and had, in the way of a structural engineer with nothing to do and a room full of people, watched the clinic's patients. He had seen it in a man in his 50s who was working on fine motor control. The specific way the man had held his coffee cup, cradled against the palm, handle facing away. The deliberate management of a grip that the hand did not fully trust. Early onset Parkinson's had a specific adaptive profile. The internet, consulted that evening after Nora was asleep, confirmed what he'd half remembered from the PT clinic observation. Patients who had been managing the condition for a long time developed compensatory strategies that were sophisticated enough to be nearly invisible. The cup posture, the left-hand placement, the controlled pace of movement. 20 years of practice would make it nearly perfect. Nearly, he sat with that for a long time. Then he closed the laptop and went to bed and made himself a rule. He was a facilities director. That was his job. What he had noticed was a structural observation about a person, not his to speak about or act on. He would do his job. He would do it well. He would not mention the cup. He started Monday. The campus on a Monday morning had a specific quality of organized motion. People arriving in patterns that told you things about the company's culture if you knew how to read them. Engineers arrived early and irregular, the pattern of people who were thinking about problems before they arrived at the building where the problems lived. Sales and finance arrived punctual, the pattern of a function that ran on meetings. The data center staff arrived in overlapping shifts, the pattern of a system that never fully stopped. Owen arrived at 7:15 before most of the campus was active and spent the first hour walking the physical plant without an agenda. This was his standard practice when starting a new facility, before any assessment, before any diagnostic. A full walk to let the building tell him what it was. Buildings communicated through their systems if you moved through them correctly. The sounds of ductwork under pressure, The specific temperature gradients near equipment closets, the places where the floor was worn differently than the surrounding area. He walked, and he listened, and he filed what he heard. The campus was well maintained. That was the first assessment. Not new, not shiny. The buildings had accumulated 12 years of use, and you could read that use in the surfaces, but the maintenance had been done by someone who understood that deferred work compounded. That the goal of facilities management was not to avoid problems, but to address them before they became the kind of problems that required emergency response. The previous director had been competent. Owen noted this as a favorable inheritance. The lab was the anomaly. He had already known about the climate control issue from the briefing materials, but walking the space before the diagnostic made it clear that the problem was not what the previous diagnoses had claimed. 3 separate contractors had told Claire's team that the climate control equipment was insufficient for the space. Owen stood in the lab at 7:45 in the morning with his hand near the supply diffuser and felt the air pressure and understood within the first 5 minutes that the equipment was not the problem. The equipment was fine. The control logic was fighting itself. He spent the rest of Monday mapping the building management system zones in the lab. He did not conclude, he only mapped. He had learned the difference between mapping and concluding in his 3rd year of engineering from a senior partner who had looked at his first load analysis and said, "You've jumped to the answer. Go back and show me the path." He had never forgotten that. The path was the discipline. The conclusion followed from the path or it was not valid. The path took 4 days. On Friday afternoon, he had the conclusion, and it was clean and documented and ready to present. He sent it to Claire as a 1-page summary, because 1 page was sufficient if the page was right. Her response came at 6 in the evening. Good. What else? He sat with those 2 words for a moment. Good, what else? Not an evaluation, a next step prompt. The response of someone who processed completed work as the opening condition for subsequent work rather than as a thing to appreciate and acknowledge. He had worked for people who appreciated and acknowledged. It was pleasant. It was also slower. He wrote back, "I'm working on a full assessment of the campus systems. I'll have it to you in 2 weeks. She wrote back, 1 week. He said, 2 weeks done right or 1 week done partially. She did not respond for 20 minutes. Then, 2 weeks. He closed his laptop and drove home and picked up Nora from Mrs. Huang's and made dinner and helped with the reading worksheet and put Nora to bed and sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad he had started keeping for the Ashworth systems work. At the top of the first page he had written, on Monday morning before he left the house, the cup. He looked at that for a moment. He had not yet decided what to do with it, not whether to say anything. He had already decided not to say anything, but how to hold it internally. He had, in 9 years of structural engineering, been in the position of knowing something about a building that the client didn't know, and the professional ethic was clear. You told the client. You documented the finding, and you told the client, and you let the client decide what to do with the information. This was different. This was not a building. This was a person who had decided, with full information about herself, what to tell and what to hold. His engineering ethic did not apply. What applied was the other ethic, the one about human beings and their right to their own private architecture. He drew a line under the word on the legal pad. Below the line he wrote, "Not mine to speak." He went to bed. The Ashworth Systems campus was 4 buildings on a block in the Central East Side, connected by a covered walkway that Owen identified as a retrofit from the 3rd year of the company's occupancy. You could read the building's history and its systems if you knew how to look. The main building held engineering and product. The second building held sales and finance. The third was the data center with its specific requirements of power redundancy and cooling. And the fourth was what the company called the lab, a mixed fabrication and testing space for the hardware components of the industrial monitoring systems that Ashworth's software ran on. He loved the lab, immediately and completely. It was the kind of space that made clear, physical sense, every system visible, every cable run labeled, every piece of equipment positioned for the logic of the workflow rather than the aesthetics of the display. Someone had designed it with the same philosophy he brought to buildings, form in service of function, function understood precisely enough to make the form inevitable. He learned later that Claire had designed it herself. This did not surprise him. The facilities role at Ashworth Systems was not, as he quickly understood a standard facilities role. He was responsible for the physical plant of 4 buildings, which was the standard part, but the buildings were complex. The data center alone had more critical systems than the entire Lloyd District commercial property, and the company's growth trajectory meant that the physical plant was actively evolving rather than stable. There were 3 capital projects in various stages of planning. There was a sustainability initiative that required retrofitting 2 of the older buildings with more efficient mechanical systems. There was a recurring issue in the lab's climate control that had been generating complaints for 6 months. He started with the lab climate control because it was the kind of problem he understood, a symptom pattern that had resisted 3 previous diagnoses and that the previous facilities manager had apparently attributed to the equipment itself rather than the system. He diagnosed it in 4 days. It was a control algorithm conflict between 2 independently programmed building management zones that had been set up to optimize separately and were overcorrecting against each other, producing the oscillation in temperature that felt, at occupant level, like the climate control wasn't working. The fix was a coordinator parameter in the BM's software. He had it running correctly by Friday of his first week. He sent Claire a 1-page summary on Friday afternoon. She responded at 6 that evening. Good. What else? He wrote back, I'm working on a full assessment of the campus systems. I'll have it to you in 2 weeks. She wrote back, 1 week. He said, 2 weeks done right or 1 week done partially. She did not respond for 20 minutes. Then, 2 weeks. He did the assessment in 11 days and gave her 15 pages with a priority matrix and a 5-year capital plan. She read it over the weekend, and on Monday morning, she appeared at his office, a converted storage room he had claimed and organized with the specific precision of someone who knew what a workspace needed to be, and said, the priority matrix is wrong. He looked at her. How? You've put the data center cooling upgrade as a year 3 project. It should be year 1. The current system is within spec. Year 1 budget is better applied to thee. The current system is within spec for current load. Our compute requirements will exceed it in 14 months. He looked at the priority matrix. He had not known about the compute expansion. It wasn't in any of the documents he'd been given. That's not in the briefing materials. No, she said. It's not. Is there a version of the briefing materials I should have? She looked at him for a moment. The quality of the look that was her specific thing. Full attention without performance. Looking at something until she understood it. I'll have my assistant send you the infrastructure roadmap, she said. Revise the priority matrix once you've read it. Yes, he said. She started to leave, then stopped in the doorway. The BM's fix was right, she said. The previous facilities manager had the same symptom diagnosis 3 times from different contractors and didn't look for the source. You found it in 4 days. I trusted the pattern, he said. She looked at him with the brief expression that he was beginning to understand, her version of a significant response. Then, she was gone. He revised the priority matrix. He sent it to her on Wednesday. She responded Thursday, correct. Proceed. The pattern of the first month was this. Claire Ashworth set the parameters of every engagement, the format of reports, the communication channel for different categories of information, the pace at which she moved through problems, and if you matched those parameters exactly, the work was efficient and productive and occasionally, in the moments when a solution landed correctly, even warm. If you deviated from the parameters, not because you were wrong, but because you were operating on different information, she noted the deviation clearly and provided the missing context without making it personal. He found this, to his surprise, restful. He had spent 22 months in a world where every deviation from the expected produced a specific kind of loss. The loss of the person who used to be there to explain what he was missing, to fill in the context, to say, Owen, you're thinking about this wrong because you don't know the part I forgot to tell you. Ruth had been that. She had been the context he was always operating inside of, without knowing it was context. And her absence had left him in a world where his readings were technically correct, but often systematically off because the frame was gone. Claire provided her own frame. Precisely. Without apology, without the expectation that he would know things she hadn't told him. There was something in that, in the specific clarity of being managed by someone who understood that information had to be given explicitly to be used correctly, that he recognized as a form of care, though he would not have called it that to her. He was in the third week when he saw the second detail. He had been on the fourth floor of the main building, reviewing the HVAC distribution plan for the mechanical upgrade, when Claire had come out of a board meeting. The meeting had run long. He could tell by the compressed quality of her movement, the efficiency of someone who had been in a contained space for too long and was processing the re-entry. She did not see him. She stopped in the corridor, alone. And for approximately 4 seconds her left hand, the hand she kept so carefully still in every meeting, the hand she rested in the specific posture on the table or on the arm of a chair, moved. Not a tremor in the clinical sense. More controlled than that. A fine oscillation, barely visible, that she suppressed in the same second she became aware of him watching. She looked at him. He looked at the HVAC distribution plan in his hand. The duct sizing on the fourth floor east wing, he said. I had a question about the ceiling plenum clearance. She looked at him for 2 seconds that contained everything and nothing. Then she said, come to my office. I have the original construction drawings. He followed her. She pulled the construction drawings. They discussed the plenum clearance. They resolved the duct sizing question. She did not mention the corridor. He did not mention it. He went back to his work. He had been carrying the cup observation for 3 weeks. He thought, on the drive home that evening, about what it meant to see something and choose not to name it. In structural engineering, there was no ethical framework for this. You saw a problem. You documented the problem. You told the client. The professional ethics were clear, and were clear because they needed to be. Buildings fell when engineers kept structural problems to themselves. The damage was physical and measurable. This was not structural engineering. He had, over the past 3 weeks, been doing the thing that good diagnosticians did, observing without concluding, collecting data without acting on it, letting the pattern emerge from the observation rather than forcing the observation into a pattern he'd decided on. He had 2 data points now, the cup and the corridor, and they resolved cleanly. He understood the system. The question was not whether he understood it. The question was what a person did with the understanding of another person's private architecture. He thought about what Ruth would have said. She had been a social worker for 7 years before they had Nora, and she had a specific vocabulary for situations like this, not this situation exactly, but the category of situation that involved knowing something true about a person that the person had decided not to share. She would have said, your job is not to manage the information on their behalf. Your job is to respond to what they give you and leave the door open for what they don't. He thought, I will leave the door open. He did not know what that meant concretely, in this specific situation, with this specific person. He thought it meant, keep showing up. Keep doing the work correctly. Be someone who is still there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. That was not complicated. He was good at it. He now had 2 data points, and a pattern, and a 20-year professional instinct that said when a pattern resolves, you understand the system. He understood the system. He was not going to say anything about the system. It was not his to say. But he thought about it on the drive home. He thought about 20 years of this, 20 years of a specific, practiced management of something true about yourself. In every meeting, in every building, in every conversation with every person who worked for you and with you. The discipline of it, the cost of it, the specific loneliness of carrying a truth about yourself that you had decided at 24 could never be allowed to reach the professional world, because the professional world would use it against what you were trying to build. He thought about Claire Ashworth at 24, freshly diagnosed, looking at the algorithm she had just written and making a calculation about what was possible and what it would cost. He picked up Nora from Mrs. Huang's. She had made a drawing at Aftercare that she wanted to show him on the drive home, holding it up from the back seat with the seriousness of someone presenting professional work. Owen took it at a red light and looked at it in the way he always looked at her drawings, not with the automatic praise that children were trained to expect, but with the actual attention she was inviting. The drawing was of a house. She had drawn houses before, but this one was different. This one had specific structural details that she had apparently absorbed over the years of living with an engineer through some kind of architectural osmosis. The walls were drawn with a thickness that represented their structural function. The roof had a visible pitch. The windows were positioned with a kind of intuitive symmetry that suggested she was thinking about the loads they interrupted. "The load path is right," he said. "This wall here, you'd want a beam over this window." Nora looked at the drawing with the interest of someone receiving professional feedback. "A beam," she said. "To carry the load from the roof. Without it, the wall above the window might not hold." "Oh," she said. "I'll add a beam." She took back the drawing. She added a beam with the small, serious pencil she kept in her backpack pocket for revisions. She was satisfied with the result and handed it to him again when the light changed, and he looked at it for a moment. At the specific seriousness of a 7-year-old who had decided that if she was going to draw a house, it was going to be a house that held up. And he thought, yes, that's exactly right. Hold it up. Make it hold. He thought about Claire's building all the way home. Not the physical building, the building of her life, the structure she had constructed around the specific fact of her condition, the load-bearing elements, and the adaptive systems, and the 20 years of successful maintenance. He was a structural engineer. He understood, at a non-metaphorical level, that the sophistication of the management she had built was extraordinary. You could not maintain a concealment at that level for 20 years without understanding your own system with a precision that most people never applied to themselves. He thought about what it would have cost. The vigilance. The constant management of every public moment, every meeting, every board appearance, every conference and interview and investor presentation. The specific cognitive load of running a company while simultaneously running the secondary system that kept the company from knowing what it needed not to know. He had spent 22 months managing the secondary system of grief. The management of Nora's questions, which were direct and deserved direct answers. The management of colleagues who asked how he was doing and needed a functional answer. The management of the empty chair in the kitchen and the drawings on the refrigerator and the specific sensory details of a person's absence that you couldn't plan for until they arrived. He understood something about systems maintained under invisible loads. He made dinner. He helped with the math worksheet. He put Nora to bed at 8:30. He sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad and added to the first page, below the line, 20 years. The discipline of it. What it costs. He did not draw another line. He was not concluding. He was mapping. That she wanted to show him. It was a drawing of a house with very specific structural details that she had, apparently. Absorbed from listening to him describe buildings, he looked at it for a long time. "The load path is right," he said. "This wall here, you'd want a beam over this window." Nora looked at the drawing with the interest of someone receiving professional feedback. "A beam," she said. "To carry the load from the roof. Without it, the window opening would be structurally." He stopped. "Without it, the wall above the window might not hold." "Oh," she said. "I'll add a beam." She took back the drawing. She added a beam. She was satisfied with the result and handed it to him again, and he looked at it for a moment, at the specific seriousness of an 8-year-old who had decided that if she was going to draw a house, it was going to be a house that held up. And he thought, yes, that's exactly right. Hold it up. Make it hold. Harrison Vale had been Claire's mentor since she was 32. Owen learned about him the way he learned about most of the company's internal dynamics, incrementally, through the specific texture of the environment he was managing. Who came to which buildings? How people spoke in corridors when they didn't know the facilities director could hear them. The quality of meetings that ended in particular ways. Harrison was 67, white-haired, the kind of patrician presence that Portland's tech community had imported from somewhere older and more formal. He had been the board's first independent chair, appointed when Claire had taken the company public, and had needed someone whose establishment credibility would reassure institutional investors about a founder CEO whose unconventional management style was either visionary or alarming depending on the week. He had served her well for 12 years. He called her Claire in board meetings in the way of someone who had earned the first name. The thing Owen noticed about Harrison was the gap. The gap between how Harrison spoke about Claire in public, in board meetings, in the quarterly all-hands addresses he occasionally appeared at, in the communications that went out to employees and investors, and how he spoke about Claire in the conversations that happened in the second-floor conference room where the board's working committees met. Owen had business in that building regularly. He had the facilities director's pass. He was, as facilities directors tended to be, effectively invisible to the people whose spaces he managed. He heard things. He heard Harrison, in the third week of Owen's tenure, tell another board member that Claire's strategic decisions for the next decade were, quote, increasingly disconnected from the market reality the board was managing. He heard the other board member, a woman named Sandra Coe, who Owen subsequently identified as one of the 3 board members Harrison had been cultivating for 12 months, say something about the difficulty of a founder who couldn't see her own limitations. He heard Harrison say, that particular problem may resolve itself. He filed this in the part of his mind that kept records. He did not file it as a threat. Initially, he filed it as a pattern that needed more data. He had been an engineer long enough to know that a single overheard conversation was one data point, not a conclusion. He kept doing his job. The capital projects moved forward. The data center cooling upgrade was accelerated to year 1. The mechanical retrofit in the second building was permitted, and the contractor selected. The lab got a new climate control zone separation that Owen had designed himself over a weekend, mapping the building's thermal loads against the equipment placement, and which worked immediately and correctly. Claire, inspecting the lab the week after the zone separation went live, said, "You redesigned the zone boundaries. The previous configuration had one zone trying to serve 2 distinct thermal load profiles," he said. "They're separated now. The fabrication floor has its own control loop." She looked at the control terminal he'd modified. At the zone map. "This is a structural intervention," she said. Yes, the previous facilities manager had this diagnosed as equipment failure. The equipment was fine. The architecture was wrong. She looked at the map for another moment. "I want you in the infrastructure planning meetings," she said. "Going forward. That's above my scope. I'm expanding your scope." He looked at her. "You should know that I don't have software infrastructure experience. My background is physical plant. The infrastructure planning meetings are about physical plant. The software team conflates the two because they don't understand buildings. I want someone in the room who understands buildings." "All right," he said. "Good," she said. And that was the conversation. He attended the first infrastructure planning meeting the following Tuesday. It was, as she had described, a room full of software engineers who understood their domain with precision and misunderstood the physical plant with equivalent precision. Owen said 4 things in the meeting. All 4 things were correct. 2 of them changed the direction of a decision that had been about to go wrong. Harrison Vale was in the meeting. He looked at Owen with the particular attention of someone who has just seen a new variable enter a room and is assessing its implications. After the meeting, Harrison stopped Owen in the corridor. "You're the new facilities director," Harrison said. "Yes, Owen Marsh. You have an engineering background." "I was a structural engineer for 9 years." Harrison nodded. He had the warmth of a man who understood warmth as a professional tool. "Claire speaks well of you," he said. "I've only been here a month. Claire doesn't take long to form assessments." A pause. "How are you finding the company?" "The physical plant is well built," Owen said. "There are some systems that have been deferred, but the underlying quality is good." "And Claire's leadership?" Harrison said, pleasantly, "from your vantage point." Owen looked at him. "Effective," he said. Harrison smiled. "Yes," he said. "She's been remarkable." Something in the pauses of the conversation, something in the quality of the word remarkable that was not quite what it appeared to be. "We're all very invested in the company's continued success." Another pause. "And in Claire's well-being." "I'd imagine so," Owen said. Harrison smiled again. "Good to meet you, Owen," he said, and moved down the corridor. Owen stood in the corridor for a moment, reviewing the conversation the way he reviewed a structural diagram, looking for the load paths, the places where the forces resolved and where they didn't. The The conversation had a load path. It ran from the warmth to the word remarkable to the phrase Claire's well-being with the specific directional quality of something that was meant to land. He filed it. He went back to work. That evening, after Nora was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad he had started keeping since the first week at Ashworth Systems. Not a log exactly, more a structural analysis of the environment he was in. Forces, loads, the places where the system was in equilibrium and the places where it wasn't. He wrote, Harrison Vale, well-being comment. Gap between public and private register. Board cultivation of co. Timeline? He drew a line. Below it he wrote, the threat is not Claire's health. The threat is Harrison using Claire's health. He thought about that for a long time. He thought about Claire at 24 with her algorithm and her diagnosis and her calculation about what was possible and what it would cost. He thought about 20 years of that calculation. He thought about the board chair who had been her mentor for 12 years and who was. In the second-floor conference room, speaking about her in the tone of someone who had already arrived at a conclusion. He thought, she doesn't know about Harrison. Or she knows and she can't show that she knows. He thought, she's been carrying this alone for 20 years. The illness alone would be enough. But she's been carrying the illness and the knowledge that if the illness became known it would be used, and she's been managing both. And she's been doing it while building a $3.8 billion company. He put down the pencil. He looked at the kitchen. At the chair where Ruth used to sit when they had the kitchen table conversations that were the daily accounting of a life shared. At the specific empty space that was still, 22 months later, the shape of a person he expected to be there. He thought, I am not going to let this happen to her. Not a declaration. Not a heroic decision. Just the same quiet, durable conclusion he reached about buildings. When a system is under an unacknowledged load. You make the load visible and you address it correctly, or the system fails. That was the engineering. That was the job. He started planning. He started with what he knew. Harrison needed Claire's health to become known to the board and specifically to become known as disqualifying. He didn't know the timing of Harrison's move or the mechanism. He needed both. He thought about how to get them the way he thought about diagnostic problems, by finding the right access point. In building diagnostics, the access point was often not the symptom, but the system that produced the symptom. You didn't look at the crack in the wall, you looked at the foundation movement that caused it. Harrison's symptom was the conversations Owen had overheard. The system behind the conversations was a board strategy that had been building for some period of time. The access point was the board's own procedural record. The board's meeting minutes were archived in the company's governance platform. Owen had been given access to the platform as part of his facilities director onboarding. The physical plant capital projects required board-level approval, and he needed to track the approval pipeline. He was not supposed to read the meeting minutes. He read the meeting minutes for the past 18 months. He did this on a Sunday evening with Nora asleep upstairs and the kitchen table clear except for the laptop and the legal pad. He read carefully, the way he read everything. Not looking for a specific thing, but looking for the pattern, the load path, the place where the forces resolved. The pattern was not subtle once he knew what he was looking for. Harrison had been introducing governance-adjacent topics into board discussions for 14 months. Not the health assessment motion itself, that was too direct for the early phases, but the framing for it. Board governance best practices for founder-led companies. CEO succession planning as a strategic responsibility. Independent health assessment requirements and public company peer benchmarks. Each topic introduced, discussed, noted in the minutes, filed. Each one individually routine. In aggregate, they were the foundation for the specific motion he was building toward. Owen sat at the kitchen table for a long time with the meeting minutes and the legal pad. He wrote, 14 months. Foundation prepared. Motion ready. Timing. Next strategic review. He drew a line. Below it he wrote, this is not improvised. This is a structural plan. He thought about that. About the specific difference between an opportunistic move and a constructed one. Harrison had not woken up one morning and decided to use Claire's health against her. He had spent 14 months preparing the ground, building the context, assembling the board members he needed, waiting for the moment he'd pre-engineered to be optimal. It was, Owen thought, with the specific clinical admiration he sometimes felt for well-engineered things, a very good plan. It was also now a plan whose structure he understood completely, and a plan whose structure you understood completely was a plan you could address. He spent the rest of the Sunday evening working through the structural analysis. If Harrison's plan had 3 load-bearing elements, the board preparation, the health assessment mechanism, the private equity timeline, then addressing the plan meant addressing all 3 in the right sequence. You didn't address one and hope the others failed. You identified the sequence that made all 3 unavailable simultaneously, or in the right order. He filled 3 pages of the legal pad. At midnight, he looked at the 3 pages and thought, I need to bring this to Claire. Then he thought, I need to bring it at the right moment. Not too early, before the plan was complete enough to present. Not too late, after Harrison had moved into the active phase. He thought, I have 1 week. He went to bed. He slept 6 hours. He got up at 6 and made Nora's breakfast and drove her to school and went to the campus and did his job. And on Thursday afternoon, he knocked on Claire's office door, and specifically to become known as disqualifying. He didn't know the timing of Harrison's move or the mechanism. He needed both. He spent a week in the second-floor conference room. Not lurking, he had legitimate business in the building. The mechanical retrofit was producing access questions that required regular consultation with the building systems, but present, in the particular invisible way of facilities directors, in the spaces where conversations happened. In the 4th week, he heard enough to understand the timing. The board's annual strategic review was in 6 weeks. Harrison had been building toward a motion, a governance motion, framed as routine, that would require the CEO to submit to a comprehensive independent health assessment as a condition of the company's D&O insurance renewal. The motion had been prepared by outside counsel. It was, legally, defensible. It was, in context, a mechanism. If Claire's condition was disclosed in the assessment, and it would be, because Claire was not a person who lied on legal documents, Harrison had 4 board votes ready to constitute a special committee review of executive fitness. The private equity consortium was waiting. The finder's fee was structured for a specific transaction window. 6 weeks. Owen sat in his converted storage room office with the priority matrix and the 5-year capital plan and the infrastructure roadmap and thought about load paths. He needed to make the threat visible, to Claire, before Harrison moved. And he needed to do it without revealing that he had been watching Harrison for a month, because that conversation had a load path too. And the load path ran through the cup and the corridor and the 20 years, and he was not going to have that conversation in the middle of this one. He knocked on Claire's office door on a Thursday afternoon. She was at her desk with a document he couldn't see, and she looked up with the particular quality of her attention. Full, steady, no performance. Owen, I need to talk to you about Harrison Vale, he said. Can I close the door? She looked at him for 1 second. Then closed the door. He closed the door. He sat down across from her. He told her what he had heard and what he had concluded, precisely, without heat, the way he described structural problems. This is the symptom. This is the load path. This is where the system will fail if the load isn't addressed. He did not tell her how he had come to be in the rooms where he heard it. He said, I have been paying attention to the second-floor conference room because the mechanical retrofit gave me regular access. He said, I want you to know this is happening. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was still. The complete specific stillness that he had learned, in 6 weeks, was her version of processing something significant. You have been here 6 weeks, she said. Yes, and you've been tracking Harrison for the past 4. I became concerned when I heard the first conversation. I needed to understand the scope before I brought it to you. She looked at him. Why bring it to me? Because it's your company, he said. Someone is moving against it. That's yours to know. Another silence. The kind that had weight. The health assessment motion, she said. He's been building toward this for how long? At least a year, from what I can hear. Possibly longer. The D&O insurance framing is good, she said. It's defensible. Yes, He's had 12 years, she said. He knows how I think. He knows what kind of motion I can't publicly oppose without it looking like I have something to hide. Yes, she looked out the window of her office. Not at the Portland skyline exactly, but somewhere beyond it. Somewhere the calculation lived. I need to know how much he knows, she said. I don't think he knows specifically, Owen said. I think he suspects something and is using the assessment mechanism to confirm it and then act on the confirmation. He doesn't need specifics, Claire said. Any disclosed health condition in an assessment, in the hands of a board that he's prepared, can be framed as a risk factor. He's built the frame already. He just needs the content. Yes, she was quiet. I need 2 weeks, she said finally, not a request. A statement of what was required. There are conversations I have to have before I can address this at the board level. I need to bring 3 board members into information they don't currently have. I need to do it in a sequence and a frame that gives them the context before Harrison gives them his. What do you need from me? Owen said. She looked at him. The full attention, the real looking. Right now, nothing. Keep doing your job. The capital projects need to continue. The infrastructure planning meetings need to continue. The visible work needs to look exactly like the visible work. And if Harrison makes another move in the 2 weeks, tell me immediately. He nodded. He stood to leave. Owen, she said. He stopped. She looked at him with the expression that was not evaluation, that was past it. The expression he had learned to recognize as the one she had no practiced response for. You didn't have to do this, she said. I know, he said. Why did you? He thought about the priority matrix and the 5-year capital plan and the data center cooling upgrade and the zone map in the lab. He thought about systems under unacknowledged loads. Because someone should, he said. She looked at him for another moment. Yes, she said. Someone should. Nora came to the campus on a Saturday. It was not planned. Mrs. Huang had a family commitment, and Owen had a day of work he could not defer. The data center cooling upgrade was in its installation phase, and a critical controls integration was scheduled for Saturday morning, the kind of work that required his presence, but that proceeded in intervals, giving him long stretches of monitoring time between active tasks. He had brought Nora before to job sites when she was small, when he was still an engineer and there were Saturday mornings when the site was quiet and he needed to be there and Ruth was working and Nora came in the truck with a book and the specific patience of a child who had been raised around professional work and understood that. Professional work required periods of quiet. She had that still, the patience, the specific willingness to be in a space without needing the space to be about her. He set her up in his office with the rubber duck lunchbox and a book about bridges that she had chosen herself from the library and that she read with the focused interest of someone who had decided that structural engineering was a subject worth understanding. She read for 2 hours. Owen did the controls integration work in intervals, checking in at the door between tasks. At 11:30, Claire appeared at the office door. She had not known Nora would be there. She had come to ask Owen something about the cooling system installation status, a question that was within the normal parameters of their work relationship. She stopped in the doorway at the sight of the 7-year-old at Owen's desk with the bridge book and the rubber duck lunchbox and the 6-inch folding ruler she had apparently appropriated from Owen's pencil cup and was using to mark her page. Owen came around the corner of the corridor at that moment and found Claire in the doorway. My childcare fell through, he said. I'm sorry, she knows not to touch anything. She's reading the Dupree Bridges book, Claire said. She was looking at the ruler in Nora's hand. Yes, she picked it from the library herself. Claire looked at Nora. Nora looked up from the book with the directness she brought to new adults. That's my dad's ruler, Nora said. I borrowed it. It's good for marking pages. I know that ruler, Claire said. It's a folding engineer's rule. They're hard to find now. My mom gave it to him, Nora said. She gave it to him when he passed his test. A pause. Something in the air of the room that was different from other pauses. His engineering exam, Claire said. Yes, she said he needed something to measure things with. Nora looked at the ruler. He already had things to measure things with, but she gave it to him anyway. Some things are given not because you need them, but because they mean something, Claire said. Nora looked at her with the evaluation she brought to things adults said. That's what he says about it too, she said. Claire looked at Owen. The expression he did not have a name for. Then she looked at Nora. What chapter are you on? Nora told her. They talked about the bridge, the one in the chapter. A suspension bridge in the Pacific Northwest that Claire had apparently visited twice, which produced in Nora the specific interest of someone who has been reading about a thing and is now talking to a person who has been to the thing. They talked for 30 minutes. Claire answered every question Nora asked with the full directness she brought to everything. No adjustment for audience, no performance of child-friendliness, and Nora responded to this exactly as she responded to her father's professional directness, with increasing trust and increasing specificity of question. At the end, Nora said, "Do you like bridges?" "I like things that hold up," Claire said. Nora thought about this. "My dad says the difference between a bridge that holds and one that doesn't is usually one detail," she said. Claire looked at Owen. He looked at the cooling system status report in his hand. "Yes," Claire said, quietly, "that's usually right." She left to review the cooling installation. Nora watched her go. Then she looked at Owen with the particular expression she got when she had formulated an opinion and was deciding how to present it. Owen had learned, in the 7 years of being Nora's father, that this expression preceded something worth hearing, and he waited accordingly. "She holds her coffee cup wrong," Nora said. Owen looked at her. "She holds it like this," Nora said, demonstrating with her own cup from the rubber duck lunchbox, palm cupped around it, handle facing away, the specific compensatory posture. "That's how you hold it when you don't trust your hand to hold it the normal way." Owen sat very still. "Mrs. Huang holds her tea like that sometimes," Nora said, "in the mornings when her arthritis is bad. She says the handle is too small to grip." "Ms. Ashworth's cup has a standard handle," Owen said. "Carefully, I know," Nora said. "That's different then." She looked at the doorway. "Is she sick?" He thought about how to answer this. He thought about what Nora deserved in terms of honesty and what was his to share and where those two things intersected. "She has something she manages," he said. "She's been managing it for a long time. She's very good at it." Nora absorbed this. "Does she have a doctor?" "I'm sure she does." "Good," Nora said. "Mrs. Huang says the most important thing about something you manage is having the right doctor." "Mrs. Huang is right about that." Nora looked at the doorway again. "She's also sad, though," she said. "That's separate from the managing thing. You can manage something and still be sad. Those are different." He looked at his daughter. She was 7. She had grown up in a house where managing and sadness had coexisted for 22 months, where her father had done both simultaneously, and she understood the distinction with the specific expertise of someone who had learned it from direct observation. "Yes," he said. "They are different." "She needs someone to know," Nora said. This was not a question. She said it the way she said things she had concluded. Not to fix it, just to know. It's easier when someone knows. He sat with that for a moment. "Nora," he said. "I know," she said. "It's not my business. I'm just saying." She went back to the bridge book. He stood in the doorway of his office for a long time. He thought about what Nora had said, not fixing, knowing, and about the specific distinction between the two. He had spent 9 years as an engineer in a professional culture that valued fixing, that understood knowing only as a precursor to fixing, that processed information as a problem resolution pipeline. It had taken 22 months since Ruth died to understand that there were categories of thing that could not be fixed, and that knowing them was its own complete act, not a failed fix. He thought, she has been carrying this for 20 years with no one in the professional space who knows. He thought, that is a structural problem, not the condition, the isolation. He picked up the status report and went to find Claire. Nora watched her go. Then she looked at Owen. "She's sad," she said. "She has a lot to manage," he said. "No," Nora said, with the authority of someone who has made a specific diagnosis. "She's sad. That's different from having a lot to manage." She looked at the doorway. "She's the kind of sad where you've been carrying it for a really long time and you don't remember what it felt like before." Owen looked at his daughter for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly right." Nora went back to the bridge book. He stood in the doorway of his office for a moment, looking at the cooling installation status report. Then he put it in the folder and went to find Claire. He found her at the data center cooling unit, reviewing the controls integration with the installation team. She was in the specific mode she brought to technical details, fully present, asking precise questions, the kind of CEO who understood the physical systems of her company at a level that surprised the installers, who were used to executives who deferred to the engineers. He waited until the installers had moved to the next task, and then he said, the Ashworth Direct Proposal. The Infrastructure Monitoring Division. She looked at him. You've been reading the strategic documents. You gave me the infrastructure roadmap. The Ashworth Direct Proposal was in the appendix. Yes, it was marked as a long-range concept. It's a good concept, he said. The physical plan architecture for industrial monitoring is underspecified in the current proposal. I've been thinking about how to resolve that. She looked at him for a moment. You've been here 7 weeks. I know. And you're telling me the long-range strategic proposal has a physical plant architecture problem. Yes, and I have thoughts about how to fix it. The quality of her attention shifted. Come to my office Monday, she said. Show me. He showed her on Monday. The Ashworth Direct concept was a natural extension of the company's core software, industrial process monitoring, distributed across physical infrastructure, with the software running on hardware embedded in the industrial environments being monitored. The long-range proposal was strong on the software architecture and thin on the physical plant side, the hardware deployment, the mounting systems, the power and network requirements in industrial environments that were often inhospitable to standard infrastructure. Owen had spent a week thinking about it from the structural perspective and had 3 pages of analysis. Claire read the 3 pages in 10 minutes. You have experience with industrial environments. Some. I did structural work on a manufacturing facility retrofit in the Willamette Valley in my 3rd year. I understand the physical constraints. The hardware mounting problem, she said. The vibration resistance spec. You can't use standard server room mounting in an active fabrication environment. The vibration loads are completely different. I have some ideas. She looked at the pages. We've been trying to solve the industrial deployment problem for 2 years, she said. The software team keeps approaching it as a software problem. It's not a software problem, Owen said. It's a structural problem. She looked at him. Yes, she said. That's exactly what it is. She stood up. I'm going to bring you into the Ashworth Direct Working Group, she said. We've had 4 engineers from the product team working on deployment architecture. I want your perspective alongside theirs. I'm a facilities director. You're a structural engineer who understands industrial environments, she said. The title is a formality. She paused. Don't tell Harrison. He looked at her. The sentence had a weight that it was carrying quietly, the weight of everything that had been said in her office on the Thursday afternoon, and everything that had not been said but was present in the room anyway. All right, he said. She looked at him for another moment, the expression he had no name for. Nora, she said. She said something to you, after I left. It was not a question. He waited. What did she say? Claire said. He thought about telling her something partial, about finding the right partial that would be true and incomplete enough. Then he thought about the cup and the corridor and 20 years, and he said, she said you were sad. The kind of sad where you've been carrying it for a long time and don't remember what it felt like before. Claire was very still. She's 7, she said. She's perceptive, he said. A long silence. The kind that had a specific texture. The texture of a person deciding whether to stay in the room with the true thing. Owen, she said. Yes, the coffee cup. She said it without looking at him. At the window. He was quiet. You noticed it in the interview, she said. Yes, and you didn't say anything. It wasn't mine to say. Another silence. Longer, the corridor, she said. 4 weeks ago, when I came out of the board meeting. Yes, you were looking at the CHVAC plans. Yes, and I saw. She was still. Very still. The specific stillness that was her form of processing the irreversible. How long have you known, she said. Since the interview, he said. I was a structural engineer. I trust the pattern. And you stayed. Yes, why? He thought about Nora's drawing with the beam added above the window. About the rule in his pocket that Ruth had given him the day he passed his PE exam. About the specific engineering philosophy that had been his professional life for 9 years, and that was also, he understood, the philosophy of the rest of his life. When you find a system under load, you don't walk away from the load. Because knowing something true about a person and staying anyway is what you do when you respect them, he said. I respect you. She looked at the window for a very long time. I have been carrying this for 20 years, she said. Since I was 24. I made a calculation at 24 that the alternative was not acceptable. That what I was trying to build was worth more than the cost of what the carrying would take. I have not second-guessed the calculation. But I have. She stopped. He waited. I have been alone in it for 20 years, she said. No one in my professional life. No one who knew both things, who I am in this building and who I am managing this condition, and who stayed. He looked at her. You're not alone in it now, he said. She turned from the window and looked at him with the expression that had no practiced response beneath it, open in the specific way of something that has been closed for a very long time and is discovering what open feels like. She didn't say anything.